All that matters is the loot. All that matters is mining a resource, get it out and earn money. And to hell with the population, to hell with the people there. They are either an effective slave labor force, or just a hindrance. They know what is happening in China with Chinese companies and in other parts of the world. If I know it, then they all know it, right? But there is so much money at stake that there is concern about what to say. Well, we really need to do something better. They just say, don't worry, everything is checked, everything is fine. They just keep saying it, and saying it, and saying it.
What do you think is the most profitable business in human history? For those who do not know, about 50% of modern capital was somehow built on slavery. And in this case, we are not talking about some euphemisms, we are talking about real slavery in the truest sense of the word. Currently, according to various estimates, more than 50 million people in more than 150 countries of the world are in modern slavery. Slavery once looked like this. Then it turned into this. And today it looks like this. Slavery today falls into three main categories: children involved in the commercial sex industry, adults involved in the commercial sex trade, and any other worker who is forced to work or subjected to any other illegal measures. Many are lured with promises of permanent employment in another country, after which their documents are confiscated, but many work in their home countries. And everything would be fine if it was only about local self-government and some kind of criminal activity of organized crime. But this whole industry is around us, and it is quite legal due to intricate schemes. And we, be that as it may, today all inadvertently are its consumers.
Almost every time you take a bite of this delicious sweets, you need to thank the hands of a child slave. Was in the parking lot at the Elephant Bank, his bones were never found.
The world's largest auto manufacturers are involved in these crimes. I say about such companies as Tesla, Volvo, Renault, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen. All they extract cobalt from Chinese mines in the Congo.
Actually, nobody really cares.
Many have reported ongoing cases of extreme physical abuse, forced labor, and killings. It has just been discovered that Xi'an, the world's most profitable fast fashion company, uses slave cotton for its clothing. Apply the same logic to most of the largest corporations in the world and you will realize that they are all de facto dependent on slave labor. None of them could have made it to where they are today if it weren't for the action.
Some boring history. Slavery is deeply rooted in human history. Slavery has always been the foundation at the foundation of all mighty civilizations. But today we won't dig that deep. We are interested in the modern paradigm, so we will go straight to an institution that has a fairly strong legacy at the moment, the transatlantic slave trade, affecting the late 15th and mid-19th century. The consequences of this campaign affected not only tens of millions of African slaves and their descendants, but the entire modern economy as a whole. Prior to this, Europe and Africa had had centuries of contact across the Mediterranean, but the transatlantic slave trade began in the late 1400s with Portuguese colonies in West Africa, followed shortly thereafter by the Spanish settlement of the Americas. The crops grown in the new colonies, sugarcane, tobacco, and cotton, were very labor-intensive, and there were not enough settlers and indentured servants. Yes, local natives were also enslaved, but many died due to the lack of immunity to new diseases that were brought from Europe by the first settlers, while the other part of the natives effectively resisted. And in connection with these events, there was only one way out: to buy slaves in Africa. African slavery at that time existed for several centuries. Some were hired servants with a limited term and a chance to buy their freedom, others were something like European serfs, and in some societies slaves could even be part of the owner's family, own land and occupy leadership positions. But when the European captains returned to Africa, offering local kings and merchants imported goods, everything changed radically. At one point, brothers and tribesmen suddenly turned into criminals and prisoners of war from competing tribes, by selling which local kings enriched their own kingdoms, strengthening them against neighboring tribes. Kingdoms began to prosper through the slave trade, but meeting the huge demand of Europeans created huge competition, so slavery increasingly began to replace other criminal penalties, and the capture of enemies became not the result, but the direct motivation for new wars. As a result, a vicious circle was formed, where the kingdoms and tribes needed firearms for protection, which they could get only in exchange for new slaves from other tribes and kingdoms in the same position. As a result, all these events finally changed society and the economy on the continent. When the slave trade was finally outlawed by the mid-19th century for various political and economic reasons, the African kingdoms that it had dominated the economy collapsed, leaving them open to subsequent conquest and colonization. And the resulting aggressive competition and the influx of firearms fueled subsequent wars and instability that persist to this day. Now about the numbers. The total value of all American slaves in the first half of the 19th century was $3 billion in the equivalent of those years. And this is only according to official sources. This is more than all the investments of that time in manufacturing and railroads combined, 3 times the total of all American banking assets and 48 times the federal government spending in 1860. And after these numbers, does anyone really think that everything ended so simply? Whatever the case, it was just the beginning.
Tremendous value. Really satisfying.
Naturally, all this centuries-old practice has not disappeared without a trace. So, imagine you are an absolutely immoral head of a large multinational corporation. Your enterprise brings you a huge amount of money, but, at the same time, your production is, in fact, practically worth nothing. You would just give up all this huge money saved, which could reinvest back into the business. But what about all this abolition of slavery and the formation of a new ethical paradigm? All this humanism is so troublesome and unprofitable. Therefore, we, as experienced entrepreneurs, have to adapt to new realities and become more accurate. That's exactly what these guys from the De Beers Diamond Cartel did, who from the 1900s gradually began to take control of all the diamond mines in Africa, and in these mines, as a rule, forced labor was used. But what should we do if we missed this train a long time ago? It doesn't matter, because in Africa there are many other interesting things besides diamonds.
There is nothing kids love more than chocolate. But there are kids who make do it.
Chocolate is the product that has always been in demand since the discovery of cocoa beans. From the Mayan and Aztec tribes to the present day, from the moment when the first cocoa beans were brought to Europe by the Spaniards, people just went crazy. Expensive pleasure, originally intended only for the elite, from the beginning of the 20th century entered mass production, and with mass production came the possibility of making huge profits. But there was one problem: all these chores with the logistics of cocoa beans at that time hit hard on the pocket. Therefore, a way was needed to somehow reduce costs. Fortunately, the chocolate manufacturers at that moment had someone to take an example from. These low-paying diamond mines have resulted in insane profits. There was only one lesson to be learned from all this, and the lesson was learned, and with it the profit, which at the moment is about $200 billion from the entire industry. The main supply of cocoa beans today is carried out by companies like Mars and Nestle from Africa, mainly from Côte d'Ivoire, for mere pennies. But it was not always so. From the very beginning, suppliers demanded quite good money, in connection with which the companies were able to find a way out, to unite in a cartel, setting a new standard price for cocoa beans. You see, the cartel doesn't always do drug smuggling. In fact, a cartel is a group of independent companies that have colluded to set a favorable price for their products, thereby increasing their profits and dominating the market. And now, all the billion-dollar companies involved in this tacit collusion were paying the same fixed price. As a result of this tacit collusion, farmers could no longer manipulate the price. But the newly formed cartel did not stop there, and after a while they simply reduced the price of cocoa as much as possible, increasing their own profits. And now they were manipulating the farmers. How are things today? Today, large companies do not purchase cocoa directly from farmers. Instead, farmers sell approximately 1 kilogram of cocoa for $1 to middlemen. These intermediaries collect beans from farmers in the regions. They package them and then resell them to national exporters for about $2.90. The beans are shipped around the world and then sold to chocolate makers for just over $3 a kilo. From 1 kilogram, manufacturers get about 40 chocolate bars. And now it turns out that if you sold one tile for at least $1, then the average profit could be $15 per kilogram. Of course, depending on production, all these calculations were deduced in a documentary, the name of which you now see on the screen. Now imagine how much chocolate is consumed worldwide every year. The cartel won. By 2015, the global profit of the entire industry exceeded $100 billion, when most farmers at that time received about $1.50 a day. And since farmers were paid just enough to stay below the poverty line, farmers had to resort to finding less and less expensive labor, and then the children come to the help.
Today, we are looking at his slave trade, which supports the chocolate industry. According to some experts, 100% is not 10, not 50%, but 100% of the chocolate that we eat. It can be traced back to cocoa farms, where child labor is used. According to their estimates, about 1.60 million children work on cocoa farms in West Africa, and as many as half of them are slaves. Not modern slavery, not some kind of soft slavery, but real slavery. Now, young children are being abducted from poor countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and taken to neighboring countries such as Ivory Coast and Ghana to have them work for the farmers who own them, processed and beaten until they completely disobey. Cocoa is sold by a large conglomerate that supplies such well-known brands as Nestle and Cadbury.
As a result, the farmers perfectly understood the beauty of their choice. Children are weaker, they cannot fight back, and in general they are quite naive. The children working on the plantations in Côte d'Ivoire come from all neighboring countries. As a rule, they are either taken by force or lured into a highly paid job.
Millions and millions of children work like slaves, work like slaves.
For one such young worker, the recruiter receives at least $250. The duties of these young workers include clearing the area of vegetation, spraying pesticides, and collecting cocoa, 12 or more hours a day, 7 days a week, absolutely free, although some lucky ones seem to manage to get 85 cents a day. As a result, the profits of the companies grow and they get away with it all thanks to some tricks. Naturally, all this could not go unnoticed for a long time, and in the year 2000, the cartel ran into a problem. The media are beginning to be full of numerous investigations, and this represented the first real threat to the cartel in history. Some action had to be taken, and so began a major reputation-cleansing marketing campaign. The cartel was well aware that today the masses are excited about one issue, and tomorrow they are interested in something completely different. And in order to calm everyone down, the companies signed a protocol on the complete cessation of the exploitation of child labor by 2005, although in fact this protocol was not a legal obligation at all, but a voluntary expression of the will of the companies. As you remember, all this time cocoa was purchased through intermediaries.
What about rumors? I heard about the rumor about child labor and human trafficking. Is there child trafficking in Ivory Coast? Honestly, I do not know. I don't know if this trade exists. This is something that I have not seen myself.
Therefore, as no one would be to blame. As a result, all the deadlines ended a long time ago, but nothing has changed. Although a little later, some investigations were resumed, and this time they had to act tougher.
Новый супер сникерс!
When the first financial reports came up, all of a sudden everything was a secret, and the farms were no longer so easy to get into. And it was only a matter of time before international human rights activists would start asking local authorities some uncomfortable questions. But there is one but. Local authorities were involved in this whole criminal chain, since all these West African countries are very poor, and cocoa was the main source of export. And now, if these countries lost all those taxes and fees from cocoa exports, the government would have huge funding problems. So the authorities themselves turned out to be interested in the fact that all these questions eventually ceased to emerge. As a result, a cleanup began, and some journalists who were investigating corruption in the government began to disappear in a strange way. That is why if you start asking all these uncomfortable questions to petty Ivorian officials, they will deny everything. As a result, companies have low prices, a complete absence of direct evidence of child labor exploitation, and the government itself is interested in eliminating all problematic issues.
It is unprocessed cobalt, or mined directly from the mine by hand by the miners. She just looks like stones. It cannot be said at all that it is cobalt. This is what everyone aspires to.
What do you know about cobalt? Cobalt is the base metal that is needed to make batteries, electric cars, smartphones, laptops, and everything else. Without cobalt, all of the above simply would not exist. Even some 25 years ago, the demand for cobalt batteries was not the same as today, but the technical boom has done its job, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, all large companies finally began to use new technologies to the fullest. All of a sudden, everyone has phones, everyone has laptops, and he was at the center of it all. All of these devices had cobalt in their batteries. The cobalt battery, unlike its counterparts, was more durable and less dangerous to operate. And at the moment, the demand trend for cobalt batteries used in modern electric vehicles, which are not going to conquer the whole world today or tomorrow, is only growing. Now back to Africa, 70% of the world's cobalt is produced here, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And, as in other African countries filled with corruption, there are huge opportunities for some here to make a lot of money. Now imagine, you own a company producing, processing and supplying refined cobalt. You could buy cobalt directly from official mining companies. It would be legal and ethical, but all this leaves us no room for maneuver and negotiations. As a result, it does not bring you as much profit as an alternative method could bring. We are talking about informal mines, where the most diverse contingent works, but mostly children. Children are the most profitable and easiest way to buy cobalt at the lowest possible prices. The local government calls it simply artisanal mining, and it sounds pretty simple for one of the deadliest industries in the country. But we don't care at all. We are tens of thousands of kilometers away, and in general it's all about numbers. And as long as the whole world borrows a new iPhone, we earn billions. Summer 2014, a man from a small town in the Congo, digging a cesspool in his yard, accidentally stumbles upon a stone slab. Looking closely, the man understands that this is not just an old stone, it contains cobalt. Over the next few months, he will be able to dig up, and later sell, $10,000 worth of cobalt. And all this in the Congo, where the average family costs about $2 a day. Shortly thereafter, rumors begin to circulate in the city, and people pick up shovels. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is the world's largest homeland of cobalt, and at the same time one of the poorest countries in the world. They do not have the expensive equipment needed to safely and efficiently extract cobalt from the ground. As in poor oil countries, mining companies made a cobalt deal with the government, although, as expected in such scenarios, not a single Congolese benefited from this. The Congolese people were left to suffer, while multinational corporations sucked out of their country's most valuable resource. It all started in 1998 when the president of the DRC allowed corruption to destroy the country's only state-owned mine. This actually led to the creation of cartels with bosses and controlled territories, but unlike official organizations that meet international standards, such organizations did not have to worry about any nonsense at all, like human rights and various benefits due to health risks. The sole concern of those organizations is the exploitation of their own people for the benefit of transnational corporations, which save huge money thanks to such production, and the most effective and profitable way is to hire children.
Darson and Richard next to him worked all day. They are 8 and 11 years old. Even this job does not guarantee enough food. Darsan has not eaten for 2 days. This is what helplessness looks like, and he is one of the children who earn money for multinational corporations in America and in China, while they suffer in poverty. For this, they will receive maybe 8 British pence a day.
Just because processed cobalt is not toxic to us does not mean that it is not toxic to those who mine it. In fact, pure cobalt is deadly. Adult men mine it underground, while little boys from 3 years old search for it on the surface. Children a little older carry 40-kilogram packages, and all this for 12 to 16 hours a day. And during this entire working day, they inhale tons of cobalt dust. Fatalities often occur. Many die in the dangerous underground tunnels, but if they are lucky enough not to die underground, or die of exhaustion, they will sooner or later suffer serious damage due to poisoning. Breathing problems, organ dysfunction, blindness, deafness, and heart disease are all caused by cobalt exposure. In addition to this, there are some other problems.
Young girls are attacked daily. It's hard to give an exact number, but we know it happens often. Poverty at home compels them to come here. Some are not even 14 years old and already have children.
We're here because we are suffering and we have nothing to eat. Foreign mining companies won't give us jobs. They get rich on our main roads, but we remain poor.
In these not-quite children's sandboxes, these kids are killing their health and risking less than $1 a day. Once the cobalt is loaded onto trucks, it goes to the warehouse. And here the most interesting begins.
If we own a large multinational company that processes and distributes cobalt around the world, then it would not be entirely ethical to sell it to companies like Apple and Tesla right after all these children have collected it. All of this would be a huge problem for both you and all these companies. But since we have many years of experience from some of our colleagues, therefore, first, we buy some cobalt from official well-known mining companies, after which some uncomfortable questions regarding the main sources and suppliers are removed from us. Next, we buy cobalt from the dubious low-cost sources we talked about earlier. But there is a problem. If we buy all this dubious cobalt directly, we'll all be pretty easy to trace. Therefore, we involve intermediaries.
And now to the numbers. For all this unbearable work, the Congo pays these children in the region of $1 a day. One child carries about 240 bags per day, where one bag weighs about 40 kilograms. As a result, all these children receive less than 25 cents per ton of cobalt, whereas cobalt collected by eminent mining companies is sold to intermediaries in the market at prices ranging from $500 to $7,000 per ton. As a result, artisanal and official cobalt is mixed together and sold to a processor. Depending on the purity, from 1 ton, on average, 150 kilograms are obtained, purified from coal, dust and soil of cobalt. And then this purified cobalt is sold to all these large multinational companies at a cost of $80,000 per ton. And all these companies are well aware of this scheme because, despite this huge middleman markup, they still save thousands of dollars compared to buying all that cobalt from official mines.
In 2020, Tesla announced that it will start use cobalt-free lithium batteries in their electric vehicles. But the company followed up on that announcement with a deal with Glencore. Something doesn't add up, does it?
And best of all, no one could ever convict us of anything. And if it comes to uncomfortable questions, representatives of all these companies can always just say,
"Look, we get our cobalt from intermediaries. How are we supposed to know where it comes from?"
No one has any proof, and even if they had, we know how to silence everyone. The DRC government is not only aware of this child labor, they are profiting from it. Everyone from government officials to local security agencies that control access to mining sites make money from this artisanal mining. If you wanted to organize mining, then you would need to bribe all these soldiers and officials. If intermediaries want to transport their goods safely, they will need to bribe the local police. As a result, all this artisanal cobalt mining becomes the most profitable business for the government, and they will not allow anyone to interfere with this. Yes, people with machine guns are not standing over all these workers, but there is no need for this. They simply have no choice. If they stop going to this job, then they will simply have nothing to eat. And while local governments and multinational corporations are getting richer, and eco-activists are screaming about how green they are, these children are dying for $1 a day. Out of sight, out of mind, right?